Hey there, we're back in our HTML tutorial. Today we're learning how to add CSS to make our HTML, our website, more unique to us by adding colors and making things big or small and positioning items. And we're going to learn how to do that in 3 different ways. And by the end of this video, you'll have what you need to know to add your own styling to your websites and build your own apps in the future with styling. Of course, there's a long way to go before we actually build a fully functional app, but this is part of how we get there. This is part of the process for learning how to build websites that users want to use because they look nice and they are enjoyable to use. So in our previous video, we built a very simple HTML document in order to learn how to add headings and paragraphs and container elements using divs and images and links to external websites such as Google or Facebook, and also internal links to our own pages on our website. So we're going to build upon that today and add styling to that, add colors, add borders, add dividers, and add containers, and learn how to just make things look nice in our website. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. But before we dive in, I need you to let me know if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Your interaction, your engagement is what keeps me going. So I need you, of course, to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment your thoughts below. Even if it's just to say hi, that helps the YouTube algorithm know that I am doing well and that you are learning something of value. So again, like this video and share over a friend. Let's dive in. So we're here on our website. And as you can see, it's what we had before. It says, welcome to ModernNerd Code. It has a section called About. And in that, it tells the user, the visitor, what this website's about. And then it has an image underneath and a divider, a horizontal rule that divides the first section from the rest of the sections. So then we have the second section that says where to find us. And it gives the user information on where to find more about us. And that's on YouTube and our Medium page and our book, Java for Humans, if they want to learn Java, which is different from JavaScript. If you want to learn that, we send them to an external link in a different tab. So we click that, it sends them to this page. And the same thing with medium.com, but this one opens in the same tab. And we learned all of this in our last video. So if you have not seen that video, I would highly suggest to go back and watch that video because you need to understand the very basics of HTML development, how to make an HTML document in order to follow along in this tutorial appropriately and actually learn as we go. And of course, I need you need yourself in order to learn to do what you're seeing here, follow along and actually code it in your text editor. And if you don't have a text editor yet, then you have to go see my first video 2 videos ago and learn what a text editor is for coding, learn which ones you're interested in, and see my suggestions for which text editors you can download, and then download one of those and start coding in it. I teach all of that in the first video of this tutorial. So please do go watch those first 2 videos if you haven't already in order to follow along in this series. Now, let's get back to this website. Again, we have our next section called What We Offer, and that's just a list of things that we offer on ModernNerd Code, which are YouTube video tutorials, code examples, one-on-one tutoring, and then our next section is called How to Contact Us, and that just gives the user a link to our contact information, our contact page, which they can click and go to another page on our website and learn how to contact us via our email address. And of course, if they want to go back to the home page, we have another link here that takes them back to the home page. So we have all of that on our website. And now we want to know, how do we add some color? How do we make things bigger, smaller, and bolder or thinner? How do we add borders to our images to make them look circular or round or rectangular? However we want to style our elements in our HTML document, we're going to learn how to do that today. So stay with me, get out your text editor, and code along with me so that you can learn hands-on. Let's dive into some CSS. Okay, we have our HTML document here, and you can see all we just went through. These are all the elements and our 2 pages, our index page, which is our home page, and then we have our contact page, and they both link to one another. This link goes to the home page, and this link right here goes to the contact page from the home page. So now we have our HTML document, we have our website. We want to add some styling. So the first thing we want to do is learn the first way to add styling to an HTML element. In our previous video, we learned about HTML element attributes. So as you can see here, this width property on this image is an attribute that tells the browser how big we want the image to be. 500 pixels, we can make that 700 pixels. And if we refresh, we see that. And we also have the source attribute, which tells the browser the source of the image, the URL where it can find the image on the internet. And you can see that's what we're showing here. And also on our links, we have a href attribute. And that tells the browser which URL to load when the user clicks this link right here. Again, we have Java for Humans. And as we can see, this is right here. There are even more attributes we can add. You can see target here. Another attribute that we can add to our elements, each of our elements, is called style. The style attribute allows us to add styling via CSS. So let's just start here with our image. If we take away this width attribute and go back to our page, we can see that, and refresh, we can see our image is now as big as it is and as tall as it needs to be. And that's because we took away that width attribute. If we put it back, it's now the right size. Another way to tell the browser how big we want our image to be is by using CSS via the style attribute, STYLE. Equals, again, every attribute has its name, an equal sign, and open and closing quotations. And then inside of our style attribute, we can tell the browser which CSS property we want to apply to this element. So in this case, to start, we want to tell the browser how wide we want our image to be, what the width should be. So that's width and then a colon. That tells the browser that the next piece of code here is going to be the value for this property, this CSS property. And that will be 700 pixels. And now if we hit refresh in our website, we can see that it's now 700 pixels. We can go back and make this 200 pixels. And you can see it there. So this is how you define a CSS property on an element using the style attribute. It's the key and then the value. So again, it looks like this: key, value. Of course, it's just an example. It's called pseudocode to show you how this works. Key, colon, value. And then semicolon to end this property. So if we go back to our width and our value of 500 pixels, we can hit save and refresh. And we can see our 500 pixels here. Now, what if we want to define another CSS property on this element, this image element? What if we want to tell it how tall to be, what the height should be? We can do that by typing semicolon to end this first CSS property width, so that we can define another attribute called height. So again, we'll type height, colon, and we'll tell it to be 300 pixels tall. So now we have our image that is supposed to be 500 pixels wide and 300 pixels tall, 300 pixels in height, right? So you don't get to choose what these properties are called. There are a set number of properties and they each have their own names. So we know that there is a width property and there is a height property, so we can use that. And the specification for CSS, the rules for CSS, tell us what the values can be. In the case of width and height, they have to be pixels. There are other units of values that you can use for measurement, but for now we're going to just stick to pixels. So pixels is px. So our image should take up 500 pixels in width by 300 pixels in height. And if we save and go back to our website and hit refresh, we can see our image is now 500 across by 300 tall. If we go back and change our height to 100, we can see that our image is now 500 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. So 500 pixels in width and 100 in height. That's exactly what we defined in our style attribute on our image element. Our image element now has a style attribute that tells the browser that we want it to be 500 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. So that's how we do it. And we can continue to add more CSS properties to our image via this style attribute. There are so many other ways that we can style our image. So one way we can do this is by telling it to have a border, and we can tell it what the border should be. So a border has 3 parts to its value. It has a size, so we're gonna make it 2 pixels wide, and then it has a type, and in this case we're gonna make it solid, and we want to tell it what color to be, so we can make it red. So we're telling our image now to have a border, right? That's a CSS property key, the property name, and then we have the value here, 2 pixels, solid red. So if we go over here and refresh, we can see our image now has a border of 2 pixels that's solid red. We can make it dotted instead, and we can make it, let's go with green. So now it's gonna be, let's make it 10 pixels. 10 pixels dotted green is going to be our border CSS property on this image. So if we go ahead and refresh, we can see we now have a border that is dotted, it's green, and it's 10 pixels wide. Now, let's go back to solid. Dotted doesn't look too good, but I like solid. Let's make this gold. So now it's gonna be, let's go 50 pixels, solid gold. Who doesn't love solid gold? And now we have a border of 50 pixels, solid gold. Of course, again, we can make this dotted if we want. There are other values for our border, but we like dotted, so let's go with that. So now we have dots that are 50 pixels wide, and they are gold around our image. That's the border. But let's go with a more reasonable border. Let's just do 5 pixels, and we'll make it solid, and let's make it gray. So little subdue. So now we have a 5 pixel solid gray border around our image. Now you can see that it's square here, and maybe we don't like that it's so jagged, that it's so right angular. What if we want to make our image have a border that is less rigid, that's more rounded? We can go into our image styled attribute and add another semicolon and add another property, CSS property called border radius. This will tell our border how round to be. The first value is 0, right? The default value is 0. And if we go here, we can see after we refresh, it's 0. Nothing has changed. But if we go back to our code and do 10 pixels for our border radius, we can see that it's now rounded. Do you see that? Right there. It's rounded by 10 pixels. We can even go in more and tell it to be rounded by, let's go over 100. Let's see what that does. And now it's rounded by 100 pixels. So our image is now has a border radius of 100 pixels, which is now very round. So it's so round that it became a pill, right? A little pill. So we can tell it how round to be. If we go ahead and do 10 pixels again, which seems fine to me, we now have our image that's a rectangle, but it's rounded. So that's how we add a border and a border radius. If we get rid of the border, then our image is still rounded, but it doesn't have a border color. There's no border to it. It's just rounded now. The radius is still there, 10 pixels. The border is gone. And if we save, we have our width, our height, and our border radius still defined on our image. So we've made an image that has styling. Isn't that wonderful? Let's add our border back of 5 pixels solid gray. I like it. That's good with me for now. What else should we style? How about we make our first section be unique, be different from the rest of our sections? We can do that by going to our container, our div element, which contains our first section's contents. So you can see our first section's header, the paragraph, and the image. This is our first section right here. And you can see the horizontal rule, which is this line that separates it from the rest of these other sections. So we want to make this section, we want to make it unique. Let's say we want to make it have a background of, I don't know, yellow or gold. We like gold. So we can go into our div and add an attribute called style. Again, style equals open quote, close quote. And now we have our style attribute. Again, it's empty, there's nothing going on. So if we save and we go back and refresh, we can see nothing has changed because we haven't defined any CSS properties in the style attribute of our div. Let's just start by making our div, our container of our first section, have a background color that is yellow. Again, gold, yellow, whatever color you want. It's up to you. But you can go ahead and type background or a background color instead, to be more specific. Background color, and let's make it gold. Our background color should be gold. Whoa! We have a gold background on our first section, about. Look at that. It's now different from the rest of our sections. These sections don't have a background color yet because they don't have any style attributes on them. You can see them right here. This is our second section that says where to find us. There's no style attribute on it. In our third section, which is what we offer, there's no style attribute there either. In our fourth section, how to contact us, also doesn't have a style attribute on its div container. But our first section does, and its first CSS property in that style attribute is to set the background color to gold. Of course, we can change that. We can make it purple if we want. Let's go with purple. Look at that, purple. A little hard to read. So let's go back and make it gold. That's easier to read because it's now black on yellow, black on gold. So now we can see our div has a background of yellow, but it doesn't look so great with all the text hitting up against the left border here and the top border, and the image also going against the left border and the bottom border. I don't like that. It doesn't look good to me. So let's add some space and some white space. Let's just make this spaced out more. We can do that by adding some padding, P-A-D-D-I-N-G. So padding is just some space around the elements, the children of this container. So this container should have a padding of, let's go with 15 pixels, right? And now if we go here and refresh, we can see our contents of our first section no longer are touching the borders of the container. It looks a lot better. So that's 15 pixels. And there's also 15 pixels here, but it looks like there's more space because of how this is set up. But we'll get into that later. But for now, we can see that our div container has 15 pixels of padding, which is great. It's exactly what we want. So now let's address what's going on with this extra space between the about header and the top border of our div. If we go into our code and on our h2 element, we add a style attribute and say margin equals 0 pixels, then we can see that our spacing now is back to where it should be. There's 15 pixels here and 15 pixels on the other side. Exactly how we told the container to style its padding. 15 pixels all around. So what is margin? So if padding is the space around the contents of a container, then margin is the space between the elements. So each element can say, hey, I want margin around myself that spaces me out from the other elements around me. I want to be 6 feet apart, right? Think about COVID, the pandemic. We wanted to have space between every person of 6 feet so that we can have some space to ourselves and not be all cluttered. So margin is similar. Margin says, hey, stay 6 feet away from me. I don't want you anywhere close to me. I need my space. So if we go back to our code, we can see that the margin on this h2 is now 0. But by default, the margin was bigger than 0 because the browser has a predefined styling for heading elements. It also has a predefined styling for all the other elements that are defined in HTML. So we need to tell the browser that, hey, we don't want any extra margin on our H2 element. So we want it to be 0. But what if we do want some margin on it? We can tell it that, hey, our about section header should have more space between itself and the rest of the content. So all the other content is below our header. So if we want to tell the browser that we want more spacing between the bottom of our header and the top of the next element that follows it, then we can tell it, hey, I want my margin to be 0, but I also want my bottom margin to be 20 pixels. Now, if we save and refresh, we can see that we added some more space. Let's just make this bigger just to be clear. So the bottom margin should now be 50 pixels. You can see we have 50 pixels here. So to illustrate this, let's go ahead and give our header a background color of red. And save and refresh. We can see this is our about section header right here. H2 and the content is about right here. We gave it a background color of red, a margin bottom of 50 pixels, and a general margin of 0. So in HTML, our margin can be top, right, left, and bottom. So we can actually add specific values for each side of our margins. So for now, we've just told it that all of our margin, every side should be 0 by default. And then we said, instead, actually, we want our bottom margin to be 50 pixels. All the other margins, the top, left, and right can be 0 right here, but we want the bottom specifically to be 50 pixels. And that's what we see here. So you can see this is the box in which the H2 takes up. This is all of the H2 element right here, the header of our section. If we go ahead and we add some padding, we can actually see the difference between padding and margin. So let's give it a padding of 10 pixels. So we can see if we refresh that now our H2's box has a padding of 10 pixels around the contents of that box. The contents is this about text. So you can see that padding is inside of the element and margin is outside of the element. So think of padding as if you were to add a bunch of clothing onto yourself. You would pad yourself, make yourself expand, right? You just add space around your contents, which is your body. All that extra clothes is the padding. But then the margin is how far you stand away from other people. Again, 6 feet away, to have my space so I don't get sick from you, or I don't get you sick. So margin is outside, right? Away from other elements. And then padding is space around the contents of the element itself. So it's inside. That's how you think about margin versus padding. We're going to use margin and padding a whole lot. So that's why I'm taking this time right now to make sure you understand what the differences are. Again, just one last time, just to be very clear, margin pushes away other elements. It's outside. It says, give me my space. Padding makes the element wider, bigger, by adding space around the contents of the element. So again, this is the contents of this H2 box. This H2's element. And the H2 is all this red space. And it has a padding we added a padding of 10 pixels using our style attribute and giving it a CSS property called padding and saying 10 pixels. So that's how we add padding and margin. Keep that in mind. And if you're ever lost, of course, you can just Google it. You should go Google more about padding versus margin and understand the differences, but that's the gist. So just keep that in mind again, because it's going to come up a whole lot. Because spacing is very important in how you make things look. The design of your website will require spacing. Your choices of spacing. The tighter your spacing, the smaller your spacing, the more cluttered your website might look. The more white space, the more empty space around your content, the more neat your content might look, your website might look. Just think about any website you've ever seen. The ones that have more spacing, more white space, more space between elements, the cleaner they look, the more enjoyable they look to use. And the ones that don't, the more stressful they might feel, right? The more cluttered they might feel. So when you're playing around with this code, go ahead and play around with some of the padding and margin and see how it looks. It's all subjective. It's up to you how you make your padding and your margins. But now you know how to do it. You just simply create a style attribute on your element and you tell it, here's my margin and here's my padding. And again, just like margin, you can target a specific side. So we targeted our bottom margin, but we can also target our top padding and just say, hey, I want 50 pixels of padding, or let's just say 70 pixels of padding on the top side of this element. Do you see that? This is all the padding on the top. And we can say, hey, I want more padding on the left. Let's go with 40 pixels. And you can see now we have more spacing, more padding on the left of our H2 element right here. And we can do the same again. We can keep going and say, hey, right, let's go with 5 or 400 pixels. Let's see. I don't know what's gonna happen, but let's see. Nothing really, because this is extra. There's no content here to pad. There's already empty space here. So if we get rid of that and just do bottom instead, we can see now we have a padding on the bottom of 400 pixels, and it pushes down everything else because our element just got bigger because it added more clothes around itself, more padding around itself. Think of just adding a bunch of blankets on top of your pillows to pad yourself. You get wider, you get bigger, right? And so that means that you take up more space. So that's what's happening here. We made our padding bottom 400 pixels. That's a little bit too much. So let's just go with 20 pixels. That's more realistic. And there it is. Okay, so we now have all this styling on our first section's elements. Let's continue. We have this text here, and it's our paragraph, but it's pretty small compared to this header, which is fine, but it's a little harder to read. So let's just make it a little bit bigger. So we can go into our element here, our paragraph element, which is P, and again, add style and equals, opening quote, closing quote. In coding, you have to recognize the patterns and follow them. Everything is consistent. So if we add styling to an element in this H2 element, by doing style equals open quotes, closing quote, and do the CSS properties within, separated by semicolons, then we have to do the same thing everywhere else. So that's the same way we're going to add styling to all of our elements. There's no creativity in that way. It has to be exactly as it is here. This is the pattern. You have to do it this way. So I want to make the font size, the size of this text here, bigger. I want it to be customized. Right now it's this big. I want it to be bigger. So I'm going to say I want the font size, that's font dash size, colon 20 pixels. So if there is a CSS property that has a name with 2 words in it or more words, you don't use a space. There's no space. Instead, we use a dash to separate the words. So again, there is no spaces in the names of CSS properties. You must use a dash. You cannot get that wrong. So in this case, we're doing the font size. So font dash size equals 20 pixels. And again, equals is done by typing a colon. So font size, colon, 20 pixels. And we save, and we go back to our website, and we can see our text is now bigger. It's now 20 pixels big. Let's make it even bigger. Let's go with 50 pixels, just to be very clear. We can see the font size is now 50 pixels, as we told it to be. But that's too big. We don't want our paragraph to be bigger than our header. That's not right. So let's just go with 16 pixels instead. So that's good to me. Now, what if I want my text to be bolder, to be thicker? It's a little too slim for my liking. Let's go ahead and make it bolder by increasing this weight, giving it more weight. So we can go ahead and say font weight is 600. So now the weight of our paragraph is 600. So that's how we give it weight. We now have our paragraph that is a weight of 600. It's more than the default, which is 100 or 300. So this is 300. Now we want it to be thicker, so we set 600. That's how it looks. The options for your font weight are specified by the font family. So there are different fonts out there, such as Papyrus or Serif or Roboto or Poppins. There are so many different font families out there, and they offer different font weights, but they're usually between 100 and 900. And so our default font from our browser is telling us that we can use 600, but if we try to use 100, it's going to be just the default. There's not really a specification for that. It's not an option really. If we try to do 500, it's also the same, but it offers 600 as an option, so we can go 600. So it's basically that. So when you add more font families to your HTML websites, you will have more options for how thick you want your text to be. For now, 600 works for us with this default font family, so we'll go with that. So that's how we add our font size, 16 pixels, and our font weight of 600. And that's what we have here. Now, what if I say I want this text to be a different color instead of black? I don't like it being black right now. So I want my text to be a different color. I can do that by adding a color property to our CSS on our paragraph element using our style attribute and giving the color of pink. Let's go with pink for our text. So now we can see our text is pink, but that doesn't look so great on a yellow background. So let's go with blue. Let's make it blue. We can see now the text is blue after refreshing the page. And we did that by adding a color property and telling it to be blue. And there are many other ways to add a color. We can use a hex, and we can go FFFFF, 6 Fs to make it white. Now we can see it's white. This is a hex code that stands for white. There's also 000, 000, which is black. There are other hex codes between that stand for other colors. So we can see here, this is some shade of red, and this is some other color, blue, green. So we can choose different colors. But let's just keep it simple and go with blue, because that's fine. Let's keep it blue. Actually, let's go with purple, since that looks better. Okay, so now we know how to make our text different colors. That's great. We now know background colors, how to add background color, how to add padding, how to add margin, how to add font size and font weight and color. We know so much right now, but there's so much more to learn when it comes to different properties, different CSS properties you can use to style your elements. Of course, we don't have time to cover all of that here, so we're going to now move to the next part of our video, which is learning the next way we can add styling to our HTML. I wanted to cover the other 2 ways to add styling to your HTML document in this video, but we don't have enough time because we're way over already. So we're going to cover that in the next video. There are 2 more ways. The first one is using a style tag, and then the second one is using a dedicated CSS file that you then import, that you link in your HTML to bring in those styles from that CSS file into your HTML document, your HTML file. We're going to learn those 2 in the next video, and we have so much more left to style on our page, our HTML document here. We're going to style this in a way that's not so pretty, just to learn how to add styling, but then eventually we'll actually build a website that looks good. I have to admit, this looks ugly right now, but it gets the job done to help you learn how to add styling, the different options you have. So that's where we're starting, but soon we'll actually build a nice looking website. So again, we will get there. Stay with me, engage with this channel, help us grow, and there's so much more left to learn. So again, if you're interested in the other 2 ways of how to style your HTML document, that's in the next video. I know I said it will be in this video, but there's not enough time. I know you're getting tired, so let's take a break. We'll come back to it. And if you're interested, you can just go Google it as well. Google is your friend. You can get ahead of where we are now. And of course, once I get to that, you'll be ahead of the game, right? Self-learning is great. So go Google that and practice what we've learned today. And lastly, try not to copy and paste. Try to actually type this out yourself, because that's how you learn. That's how you commit what you're learning to memory and actually get to where you want to go. Copy and pasting is easy, but you just won't learn that way. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe and like this video and comment your thoughts below. Even if you just want to say hi and let me know what you're working on, what you're trying to build, why you want to learn how to code, just say hi below. Just comment something below to help this channel grow. Thank you. I'm Lincoln, and I'll see you in the next one.